Louisiana's most incestuous cousins. They generated the most deformed children after generations of marriages. In the heart of Louisiana's isolated swamps, far from the eyes of modern society, a family has maintained a dark secret for decades that only surfaced in 1978, when local authorities finally entered the property of Boudreaux. What they found even shocked the most experienced researchers: a family lineage that, for over a century, had practiced marriages among close relatives, resulting in one of the most disturbing stories of genetic degradation already documented in the United States. The Boudreaux family settled in the Pantanosa region of Terrebonne Parish around 1850. When Jean-Baptiste Boudreaux, a Cajun fisherman, built a rudimentary cabin on the banks of an isolated bayou. During the following 3 generations, the family remained relatively integrated with the small local community. It was only after the Great Depression, when economic difficulties intensified, that the Boudreaux gradually began to move away from social life. Maurice Boudreaux, great-grandson of Jean-Baptiste, decided in 1935 to take his family to an even more remote area of the swamps, claiming that the outside world was corrupted and only family purity could be entrusted. This decision marked the beginning of deliberate isolation that would last decades. Maurice had 5 children, 3 men and 2 women, who grew up practically without contact with people outside the family core. Dr. Robert Thibodeau, a geneticist at the University of Louisiana, who later studied the case, explains, geographic isolation alone does not cause consanguinity. It was the combination of this physical isolation with a distorted family ideology that created the conditions for this genetic tragedy. Recovered ownership documents revealed that Maurice developed a kind of family doctrine based on distorted interpretations of religious texts and the belief that Boudreaux blood had superior qualities that needed to be preserved. He actively encouraged relationships between cousins initially, and later even between brothers. Ellie Carter, a social worker who participated in investigations, describes what she saw. Property was like an island in time, without electricity, without radio, without any connection with the outside world. Younger children, the 3rd generation of this closed system, featured obvious signs of physical and cognitive commitment. The 1st generation of weddings between cousins produced children with relatively moderate problems. Joseph Boudreaux, Maurice's eldest son, married his first cousin, Marie, in 1953. They had 6 children, 2 of whom were born with extra fingers, polydactylia, and 1 with a leporine lip. However, everyone could work reasonably well in the isolated family environment. The true genetic deterioration began to manifest in the next generation, when the sons of Joseph and Marie were also encouraged to marry each other. Paul and Annette Boudreaux, cousins, generated 4 children between 1971 and 1976, all with serious congenital anomalies, including microcephaly, severe facial deformities, and deep intellectual impairments. Check it out if you are already subscribed to this channel. The story of these Louisiana cousins is just one of the many disturbing revelations about consanguinity that we share exclusively here. Subscribe now not to lose the next chapters that reveal even more shocking secrets of these isolated families. The discovery of the Boudreaux family occurred by chance. In March 1978, a local hunter, Thomas Lebloux, was lost in the swamps during a storm, and sought shelter near the isolated property. What he glimpsed at a distance disturbed him deeply. Children with unusual appearances, moving uncoordinated by the backyard of the main house. They were like beings from another world, Leblu reported later to the police. Some had disproportionately small heads, others had twisted members. The whole scene caused me indescribable discomfort. When authorities finally entered the property in April 1978, they found a complex of 5 rudimentary houses occupied by 32 people, all interconnected by a complex kinship network. Photographs and confiscated personal documents revealed that, by that time, first cousins had already married 3 consecutive generations, and in the latest generation, even siblings had formed unions. Researcher Sheriff Dale Theriot documented his initial impressions. "I had never seen anything like it in 22 years of career. Some of the younger children could barely be recognized as human at first glance. There was a girl of about 6 years who could not walk or talk, just emitted guttural sounds. Disproportionately short, and his face presented characteristics that reminded me of a nightmare being." Dr. Margaret Wilson, pediatrician who examined the children, elaborated detailed reports on the medical conditions found in the 3rd generation of consanguineous marriages. "We observed an alarming concentration of deleterious recessive genes. 12 of the 17 children born after 1970 had serious craniofacial deformities, cardiovascular. 4 were born with advanced polydactyly, not just extra fingers, but complex and non-functional digital structures. One of the most impressive cases was that of Emily Boudreau, born in 1974. The result of the union between Paul and Annette, first-degree cousins that shared the same grandparents. Emily had a rare condition known as cyclopy. She had only one central eye, positioned where her nose would normally be, and did not have the nasal septum. His life expectancy was extremely limited, but surprisingly survived until he was 4 years old. Jerome Boudreau, a patriarch of the family at the time of the discovery and son of Maurice, vehemently defended family practices when confronted by the authorities. "What we do is not anyone's account. We always live our way, far from the rules of others. Our family is strong precisely because we keep our blood pure." Anthropologist Dr. Claire Fontenot, who studied the case extensively, explains, "What we observed in the Boudreau family is a phenomenon known as the founding effect combined with repeated consanguinity. When a small and isolated population continues to reproduce internally, certain genetic traits, including the harmful ones, become increasingly concentrated, genetically limited, that then committed deliberately consanguineous marriages, exponentially amplifying problems." The investigation revealed that the family had developed its own simplified language, a dialect derived from the French Cajun, but practically incomprehensible to external speakers. His religious practices were equally peculiar, a mixture of distorted Catholicism, local superstitions, and beliefs invented by Maurice decades earlier. Improvised medical records, maintained by Lorraine Boudreau, who assumed the role of healer of the family, documented a disturbing pattern. Each new generation had healthier health problems than the previous one, with increasingly severe child mortality. The authorities faced an unprecedented ethical and legal dilemma. Louisiana laws prohibited marriages between siblings, but marriages between first-degree cousins, although socially disapproved, were not technically illegal in the state at that time. In addition, many of the unions had never been officially registered, existing only in the context of Boudreau's family traditions. District Prosecutor Martin Gudari decided to focus primarily on children's well-being. Our immediate focus should be on that appropriate medical care for these children, some of whom have never received any kind of professional attention. Wedding-related legal issues can expect. 17 children under 18 were temporarily removed from the property and placed under intensive medical care. The exams revealed the alarming extent of health problems. In addition to visible deformities, many suffered from serious internal conditions, including congenital heart disease, kidney malformations, and severe neurological problems. The case gained limited notoriety in the local media, but authorities endeavored to contain the dissemination of details and photographs, citing concerns about the dignity of the victims. A Times-Picayune journalist, however, was able to briefly interview Alice Boudreau, one of the few family members with communication capacity articulated with external people. "We didn't know there was another way," said Alice, then 32, herself the result of a marriage between first-degree cousins and married to her cousin Raymond. "Since I understand myself, that's how things worked. When you grow up listening that the outside world is dangerous and that only the family can be reliable, you believe it." The case of Boudreau became a milestone in the studies on the effects of prolonged consanguinity. Dr. Victor Lamarck, a forensic geneticist who examined collected samples from the family, later published an anonymous study protecting the identity of those involved, who became a reference in the medical literature. What we observed here is one of the most dramatic examples ever documented of the effect of harmful recessive gene homozygosis, Lamarck wrote. After 4 generations of consanguineous marriages, the coefficient endogamy reached levels that made it virtually inevitable the manifestation of rare genetic conditions. When you think of the unimaginable suffering of these Boudreau children, confined to Louisiana's swamps for generations, what emotion predominates in your heart? Leave in the comments. The pain of these children makes me reflect on humanity. The older children, capable of basic communication, reported to social workers disturbing aspects of family life. Martha Boudreau, then 14, explained how they were taught early on that marrying outside people meant betraying the family and contaminating the lineage. Uncle Jerome always said that our blood was special, that we had to keep him pure. When any of us questioned, he showed photographs of people from the city and said they were all sick and weak. The most tragic of the findings was made in a small makeshift cemetery on the property, hidden between cypress and partially submerged in the swamp. It contained 23 rudimentary graves, most of babies and young children who had not survived due to extreme deformities. Many of these births had never been officially recorded. Dr. Patricia Montgomery, a psychologist designated to evaluate adult family members, found consistent compromised cognitive development patterns, even among those who did not have apparent physical deformities. What we observed are the combined effects of extreme social isolation, repeated consanguinity, and educational and cultural deprivation, he concluded in his report. Ironically, the records meticulously maintained by Maurice Boudreau, the original patriarch that began family isolation, became a valuable source for the researchers. Their diaries, written between 1935 and 1968, documented obsessively genealogies, births, and physical characteristics of the descendants, often with disturbing observations on how to improve lineage through specific unions. Boudreaux's destination has become a complex issue for Louisiana's social assistance system. The most severely affected, with multiple commitments, were sent to specialized institutions. Those with a larger functional capacity were placed in adopted homes. Although their unusual family history and behavioral problems resulting from extreme isolation make successful adaptations difficult. Shelley Romos, one of the social workers designated for the case, recalls these children faced monumental challenges. In addition to the physical and cognitive limitations resulting from consanguinity, there was cultural shock. Many had never seen television, did not know what a telephone was, and had extremely limited concepts about the world beyond swamps. Family adults faced their own set of difficulties. Without professional skills, with no formal education non-existent, and often presenting moderate cognitive problems, its integration to conventional society proved virtually impossible. Some remained in nearby rural areas, under regular supervision of the authorities to prevent the reconstitution of the old family arrangement. The case provoked legislative debates in the state. In 1980, partially motivated by the Boudreaux case, although never explicitly mentioned, Louisiana strengthened her laws against consanguineous marriages, including more severe penalties and expansion of the legal definition of prohibited relationships to explicitly include first cousins. The scientific legacy was equally significant. Genetic samples collected with judicial consent, as many had no legal ability to consent, were used in pioneering research on rare genetic diseases. Chromosomal analysis revealed mutation patterns that helped identify specific genes associated with various conditions. Eleanor Breaux, a geneticist who studied the samples, explains, although circumstances are deeply tragic, genetic data obtained allowed advances in understanding multiple rare conditions. We identified specific standards of genetic expression that would normally be extremely rare in the general population. Among the most studied cases was that of Danielle Boudreaux, born in 1975, which had an extraordinary combination of phenylketonuria PKU, Meckel syndrome, a rare cilianopathy disturbance, and an unusual form of albinism. The mathematical probability of these three recessive genetic conditions manifesting themselves simultaneously in an individual of the general population would be infinitesimal, but the consanguinity repeated by generations had concentrated multiple deleterious genes. A particularly disturbing aspect revealed during investigations was the gradual normalization of deformities within the family system. Jerome Boudreaux, in his own record, the ones had developed their own classification for the different types of children born in the family, giving them functions based on their abilities. It is evident that, over the generations, the family developed its own social system that accommodated and categorized the growing abnormalities, said anthropologist Dr. André Leitzk. Children with certain types of deformities were designated for certain family functions, creating a perverse hierarchy based on the type and gravity of genetic impairments. The recovered photographic evidence of the property, today maintained in confidential files, document the progressive genetic deterioration over generations. Comparing images of the 1950s with those of the 1970s, experts were able to trace the visible climb of anomalies as consanguineous marriages intensified. Dr. Lamarck explains, in the first generation of weddings between cousins, photographs show subtle facial asymmetries and occasional digital anomalies, extra or fused fingers. In the next generation, we already see children with obvious craniofacial disproportion. In the third generation of consanguinity, photographs document individuals with such severe malformations that defy standard medical classifications. A longitudinal study conducted between 1980 and 1995 accompanied the development of surviving children. The results confirm that, even with intensive medical intervention and access to specialized education, genetic damage was largely permanent and progressive. Of the 17 children initially removed from the property, only 9 survived until 1995. Mostly with significantly reduced life expectancy. The case of Boudreau is often cited in academic discussions about ethics, genetics, and social responsibility. The central question remains: how could a family practice consanguinity for generations, resulting in visible and growing human suffering without external intervention? Social worker Ellie Carter, who accompanied the case for decades, reflects, this was not just a genetic phenomenon, but a societal failure. The surrounding community was aware, at some level, of the existence of this isolated family. There were rumors, stories, but the combination of excessive respect for family privacy, local superstitions about the inhabitants of the swamps, and simple indifference allowed the situation to persist through decades. In 1998, 20 years after the initial discovery, historian Dr. Michelle Thibault conducted interviews with residents of the region, documenting pre-existing community knowledge about the Boudreau. Their results were disturbing. Many places admitted to hearing stories about the strange family of the swamps since childhood, but they considered it part of regional folklore or deliberately ignored rumors. A local merchant who occasionally sold supplies to Jerome Boudreau confessed, "We knew something was not right." Jerome always came to town alone, maybe twice a year, and bought huge amounts of basic supplies. It was reserved, spoke strangely. The legacy of the Boudreau manifests itself today, though discreetly, scattered by Louisiana's institutions and adoptive families. The younger survivors, now adults, carry in their bodies and minds the consequences of decisions made by their ancestors. Its continuous medical problems represent a reminder of the dangers of prolonged consanguinity and extreme social isolation. Dr. Jason Landry, a geneticist who continued to study the case, explains, what makes Boudreau such a significant case is that we can precisely track genetic deterioration through documented multiple generations. Humans, contemporary genetic analyses, using technologies not available at the time of the initial discovery, revealed that the founding effect in the Boudreau family was even more significant than the initially estimated. Jean-Baptiste Boudreau, the original ancestor that settled in the region in 1850, already carried recessive genes for at least 5 rare conditions. Repeated consanguinity has dramatically expanded these traits, resulting in the extraordinary concentration of anomalies observed in children born in the 1970s. In a cruel irony, the original property of the Boudreau was eventually absorbed by a nature reserve in 1990. Today, only partially submerged ruins of the original structures remain, gradually claimed by the swamps. The small cemetery was documented, but left intact by decision of the authorities. Their simple wooden crosses have long deteriorated. The case generated significant changes in social work practices in rural areas of Louisiana. Range programs have been implemented to identify isolated families, and health professionals received specific training to recognize signals of consanguinity and intervene appropriately. Only 3 adult members of the original Boudreau generation still lived in 2020. Alice Boudreau, one of the few who was partially adapting to conventional life, gave an anonymous interview to an academic study. "I don't blame my parents or grandparents. They didn't know what they were doing. They believed they were protecting the family. But the price we paid. No one should go through what our children went through." Dr. Robert Thibodeau, who has studied the case from the beginning, concludes, "The history of Boudreau remains one of the most documented examples of the effects of prolonged human consanguinity. It is a tragedy that should never have happened, and which continues to provide important lessons for geneticists, social assistants, and legislators. Family autonomy with the social responsibility of preventing predictable damage. If you watched so far, it is because you like this story. Leave a comment saying, 'I watched here,' so I can meet you and know who really likes the stories here on the channel. Be sure to enjoy this video and share it with people who are also interested in these revealing stories about the darkest secrets of society. Check it out if it is already subscribed to this channel, as we have many other shocking and educational stories about similar cases that you will not find anywhere else. The case of Boudreau is not just a scientific curiosity or a warning tale. It is a reminder of the fragility of the human genome when subject to extreme conditions, and the collective responsibility we have to protect the most vulnerable, even when they are hidden in the shadows of the swamps, far from the eyes of society.